When my son told me I was not welcome for Christmas, I smiled, put my truck in reverse, and initiated a financial apocalypse. I pulled my 2008 Chevy Silverado across 3 lanes of traffic, leaving a trail of burnt rubber on the asphalt, while the scent of my homemade hickory smoked ribs filled the cab. Dad, Kendall is stressed. Her parents are here, and it is just awkward. My son had whispered over the phone like a coward. 2 days later, my phone screen was lit up with 58 missed calls and a notification that their $1.2 million home had been sealed by the bank. I was rolling down Interstate 85 with the heater in my old truck, clattering away just barely doing its job. The cab smelled like heaven. Specifically, it smelled like brown sugar mustard and slow-smoked pulled pork. I'd been up since 4 in the morning, tending the smoker out back, same as I'd done every Christmas for the past 30 years. Riding on the passenger seat next to me were 3 pans of my slow-smoked pulled pork wrapped in foil, a peach cobbler that was still warm, and a cooler full of slow-cooked black-eyed peas seasoned with smoked ham hocks. This wasn't just food, it was my history. It was the way my mother showed love, and it was the way I showed love. Welcome back to Honor Revenge Stories, where we sit with the stories that remind us what dignity actually costs and what it is worth fighting for. If this is your first time here, pull up a chair and stay a while. And if you have been here before, tap that subscribe button so the next story finds its way to you. Before we go any further, drop one word in the comments right now that describes your mood walking into this story. Just one word. I want to see it. A quick note before we begin: some elements of this story have been shaped and dramatized for the purposes of storytelling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental. But the message at the heart of it is as real as it gets. I glanced at my rearview mirror and ran a hand over my gray beard. My truck was beat up and my flannel shirts had seen better days, but right then I felt like a king. I was on my way to see my son Damon and my grandson Theo. I checked the dashboard clock. 11:30 in the morning. Good time. I'd roll into their gated community in Georgia right around noon, just enough time to get the food spread out on the table. I thought about Theo's face when he spotted the new football I had hidden behind the seat. I thought about Damon. He was a good boy, or at least he had been. Something had shifted in him lately. Ever since he married Kendall, things were just different. Kendall was 28 years old, white, and had lived her entire life through the lens of an Instagram filter. She tolerated me at best. I could tell she looked down on my truck. I could tell she looked down on my clothes. In her mind, I was just a retired old black man getting by on a pension. She had no idea I'd served as the chief financial officer of a global logistics firm, or that I held commercial real estate across 3 states. I never told her. I never even told Damon the full picture. I wanted them to build their own character. My phone buzzed on the magnetic mount. Damon. I hit the speakerphone and smiled. Hey son, I'm about 20 minutes out. I hope y'all are hungry because this cobbler came out perfect. Silence on the other end. Not a comfortable silence, the heavy, thick kind that carries bad news. Damon cleared his throat. Hey Dad, look about today. He was whispering. Why was he whispering in his own house? Is everything okay, son? I asked, my foot easing off the gas. Yeah, everything's fine. It's just that Kendall is really stressed right now. Her parents flew in from Georgia this morning. It was a surprise. I frowned. Okay, that's fine. I brought enough food for an army. You know I always overcook. I can set a couple the extra plates. Damon sighed, and I heard the nerves riding in his breath. That's the thing, Dad. Her parents, they're a little different. They're not used to your kind of volume. They're very reserved people, and frankly, Kendall is worried that having you there might be overwhelming. We were thinking that maybe this year we just keep it intimate, just us and her parents. My grip tightened on the wheel. My kind of volume. I knew exactly what that meant. But before I could respond, I heard her voice drifting in from the background, faint but clear enough. Kendall's voice was shrill and cutting. Damon, tell him not to bring that greasy soul food. My mother is on a strict keto diet, and I don't want the smell of pork fat lingering on my silk curtains. Tell him we'll see him in January. The words landed like a physical blow. Greasy soul food, lingering smells, January. Damon came back on the line, his voice unsteady. Yeah, Dad. So, maybe we can do a late Christmas next week, just you and me. I think it's best if you turn around. I'm sorry. I didn't say a word. I didn't beg. I didn't ask why I was being shut out of my grandson's Christmas while her parents were welcomed with open arms. A coldness spread from my chest down into my stomach. A familiar coldness, the same one I used to feel in the boardroom when a hostile takeover had to be executed. It was the absence of emotion. It was the arrival of clarity. I looked at the passenger seat, the foil-wrapped pork I'd tended for 12 hours, the cobbler made from my grandmother's recipe, the gift-wrapped football, and right then it landed on me. I had been playing the devoted father, while Damon had been playing the embarrassed son. He was ashamed of me, ashamed of my blackness, ashamed of my culture, ashamed of the very things that had written the checks for his private school education. "Okay, son," I said finally, steady, level, deep. "I understand. You want a private Christmas? I hope you get exactly the Christmas you deserve." "Dad, wait. I just mean—" Damon started to stammer. I reached out and tapped the red button. Call ended. The quiet in the cab was deafening. My hands were trembling not from grief, but from a rage so clean it felt like white heat. I checked my mirrors. The highway was moving, but there was a gap in the median cut out for emergency vehicles. I didn't give a thought to the traffic laws. I cranked the wheel hard left. My tires screamed across the pavement as I swung the truck around. Horns erupted around me. A sedan lurched out of the way. I didn't flinch. I straightened out and pushed the accelerator down, pointed back the way I'd come. I wasn't going home to fall apart. I wasn't going home to sit alone in the dark with leftovers. I was going to war. 5 minutes down the road, I spotted a rest stop. I pulled into the far end of the lot, as far from the building as I could get, and killed the engine. The only sounds were the tick of the cooling motor and my own breathing. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my iPhone older model cracked screen protector, the kind of thing that made Kendall assume I was broke. I unlocked it and opened my banking app. Not the checking account I used for groceries. I went to the private wealth management section. The interface shifted from blue to black and gold. Face ID confirmed. Everett Granger portfolio value. The numbers were long. I didn't stop to look at them. I went straight to the scheduled transfers tab. There, it was a recurring monthly transfer set for the 24th of every month. Recipient, Damon Granger. Label, mortgage support. Amount, $6,500. For 3 years, I had been carrying the mortgage on that big colonial house in Georgia. Damon told me his salary as a marketing director was mostly commission-based and things were tight. I wanted him to have a solid foundation. I wanted Theo to have a backyard. So I stepped in handling the payments directly so he could put money away. I never asked for thanks, just paid it. $6,500 every single month like clockwork. And this is how he repaid me. Banished from my grandson's Christmas because his wife decided my food smelled too black for her parents. I stared at the transfer scheduled to go out tomorrow morning, Christmas Eve. My thumb hung over the screen. I didn't hesitate. I tapped the payment. A menu came up, edit or cancel. I pressed cancel. A warning asked if I was sure. I pressed yes. The screen refreshed. Next scheduled payment, none. But I wasn't finished. Canceling the payment was a slap on the wrist. I needed to drop a hammer. I closed the app and opened my contacts. Scrolled to W. Waverly. Conrad Waverly, my personal attorney, the shark I kept on retainer for my real estate work. It was Christmas Eve, but Waverly would pick up. He always picked up for me. 2 rings. "Everett," Waverly said, his voice crisp. "Merry Christmas. I'm guessing this isn't a social call." "It isn't," I said. My voice was gravel. "I need you to pull the file on the property at 317 Ridgecrest Way." "Damon's house," Waverly asked. "Is everything all right?" "No," I said. "I want you to look at the deed structure. When I bought that debt from the bank 2 years ago, we set up a shell company to hold the note." "Correct," Waverly confirmed. "Granger Holdings LLC is the lien holder. Technically, you were the bank. Damon thinks the mortgage is with Wells Fargo, but the servicing rights were transferred to us. We kept the interface looking standard, so we wouldn't bruise his ego." "Good," I said. "Listen closely, Conrad. I want to activate the acceleration clause." A pause on the line. "Everett, the acceleration clause is for default. Technically, he hasn't defaulted. You've been making the payments for him." "Let me check the insurance records," I said. I remembered a letter I'd seen lying on Damon's counter months back, a notice about lapsed homeowners insurance. He'd tossed it in the trash, said he'd get to it later. Knowing Damon, he never did. "Check whether the policy is still active." I heard typing on the other end. "Hang on, accessing the database." More typing. "You're right. The policy lapsed 60 days ago. That's a breach of contract." "Perfect," I said. Since the contract is breached, I want to call the loan. The full amount, $1.2 million due immediately. Waverly sounded hesitant. It's Christmas. This is your son. If we move on this, the foreclosure process starts automatically. The sheriff serves a notice. The locks get changed. This is nuclear. He told me I wasn't welcome in the house I pay for. I said, my voice flat. He told me I smell. He chose his wife's racism over his father's dignity. Do it, Conrad. Send the notice and freeze the auxiliary credit lines tied to the home equity. Are you sure? Waverly asked one last time. I looked at the cold pork on the seat beside me. I looked at the football that Theo wouldn't be getting tomorrow. I have never been more sure in my life. Execute it. I hung up. I sat there a moment, watching the first snowflakes begin to settle on the windshield. I felt lighter. The weight of bankrolling a man who had no respect for me had lifted. I put the truck in gear and eased back onto the highway. I was going home to eat my food in peace. My son wanted a private Christmas. I was going to make sure he had one he would never forget, the kind where the lights go out and the doors stay locked. 2 days passed in a silence so heavy it had physical weight. I sat in my leather recliner in the den, nursing a glass of scotch and watching my phone. December 26th. Christmas had come and gone. I'd spent it alone working through the food I'd smoked for my family while old westerns played on the television. I checked my call log. 0 missed calls from Damon. 0 texts. 0 voicemails. My son hadn't even sent a message to make sure I'd made it home after I'd spun the truck around on the highway. He had erased me. But while his voice was silent, his spending was deafening. My phone vibrated against the mahogany side table. American Express notification. A charge of $1,200 at a French wine importer. Authorized user Damon Granger. An hour later, another buzz. $500 at Tranquil Lux Spa. Authorized user Kendall Granger. They were running up my supplementary platinum cards I'd handed them for emergencies to toast my absence. Vintage Bordeaux and deep tissue massages on my account while I sat alone in an empty house. I didn't get angry. Anger is a waste of energy. I got curious. I reached for my iPad and opened the smart home app. When I'd bought that colonial house for them 3 years ago, I insisted on putting in a top-tier security system. I told Damon it was for his protection. In truth, I was protecting my asset. And I knew Damon was far too lazy to ever update the master admin passwords. I logged in. The feed came up instantly crisp and high definition. The living room camera showed a scene of domestic bliss that turned my stomach. Damon was on the floor surrounded by open gifts. Kendall was stretched across the sofa in a silk robe, and there settled into the armchairs I had paid for were her parents, the Duttons, holding crystal glasses filled with the dark red wine I had just been billed for. I turned up the volume. The audio was sharp. Kendall's father, a man named Gerald Dutton, the type who wore ascots indoors to disguise a hollow character, was laughing. He swept his wineglass around the room in a broad gesture. You know, Damon, it's honestly a relief your father didn't show up. Last thing we needed was him tracking mud through here in his work boots. He probably smells like fertilizer. Does the man even own a suit? Kendall giggled into her glass. Oh, Dad be nice. Everett tries his best. He just doesn't understand how to carry himself in polite society. He's very rustic. He thinks rolling up with a truckload of greasy meat is sophisticated. We just wanted a classy Christmas without having to explain table manners to the help. I waited for Damon to defend me. I waited for my son, the boy I'd put through college, the man whose mortgage I was carrying, to stand up and say that his father was a former CFO who could buy and sell Gerald Dutton 10 times over. I waited for him to say that the calluses on my hands came from hard work, not from being simple. But Damon just laughed. He swirled his wine and laughed right along with them. Yeah, you're right. Dad is a lot. It's better this way. He's happier with his own kind. Anyway, I froze. The screen blurred for a second. His own kind. That was it. That was the moment the last thread of sentimental attachment snapped clean. I studied Gerald Dutton on the screen, the man carrying himself like a lord in a castle, and I thought about what I actually knew. I knew exactly who the Duttons were. I set the iPad face down on the table. I needed to sit with the full irony of this situation. 2 years ago, Gerald Dutton had called me in a panic. He had no idea who I really was. He only knew I was Damon's father and that I appeared to have stable finances. He told me he was staring down a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. His real estate investments in Florida had cratered, and the IRS was breathing down his neck. He was going to lose everything. He begged me not to breathe a word. To Kendall said he didn't want to burden her. I listened. I didn't like the man, but I had no interest in saddling my daughter-in-law with her parents' financial wreckage. I wanted Damon's life to stay smooth. So I made some calls. I set up a shell corporation in Delaware. I bought Gerald Dutton's debt from his creditors for pennies on the dollar and restructured it. I effectively bailed him out. Technically, I owned Gerald Dutton. I owned his debt. I owned his house in Georgia, and I owned his dignity. He just didn't know it was me. He thought some anonymous angel investor had pulled him back from the edge. And here he sat in my house drinking my wine, calling me a gardener. And my son was nodding along. I had pulled them both back from the street, and they were spitting in my face. They believed their whiteness and their pretension made them superior. They mistook my silence for ignorance. They were about to learn that my silence was simply the quiet before the execution. I picked up my phone. It was time. I scrolled to Conrad Waverly's contact. I didn't care that it was the day after Christmas. I didn't care if he was on a beach somewhere. I hit dial. He answered on the second ring. "Everett," Waverly said. "I got your message about the mortgage acceleration. The paperwork is drafted. We're ready to serve them." "Good," I said. My voice was calm, cold, and emptied of any mercy. "But we're going to escalate. I want you to execute Phase 2 immediately." "Phase 2, Waverly said. "You mean the vehicles, das Barika?" "Yes," I said. "The Porsche Macon Kendall drives the lease is in my name. I'm the primary account holder. She's just an authorized driver, reported as unauthorized use of asset. I want it repossessed today, right now. I want the tow truck in their driveway before they finish that bottle of wine." "Done," Waverly said. I could hear him typing. "Anything else?" "Yes. The credit card's the Amex Platinum they've been using. It's a supplementary account linked to my black card. Flag it as compromised and freeze it. Not a temporary hold, Conrad. I want it terminated." Waverly paused. "Everett, if we do that, they'll be stranded. They have no liquidity. I ran a soft credit check on Damon like you asked. He's maxed out on his personal cards. If you cut the Amex, they have zero purchasing power." "Now that's the point," I said. "They want to live a champagne life on a beer budget. I'm cutting off the tap. Do it." I hung up. I leaned back and watched the clock. 5 minutes, then 10, then 15. My phone lit up on the table. American Express notification. Transaction declined. Whole Foods Market. Amount $340. I smiled. They must have burned through the wine and gone out to restock for their fancy brunch. Now they were standing at a checkout counter, discovering that the magic card was nothing but a useless piece of plastic. I poured myself another glass of scotch. The show was just getting started. The morning of December 23rd broke cold and bright over the manicured lawns of Georgia. From the vantage point of my home security app, I watched the scene unfold with the patience of a sniper waiting on a target. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. Damon and Kendall were getting dressed up for a brunch neither of them could actually pay for. I watched the front door swing open on the security feed. Kendall emerged first runway, ready draped in a cream cashmere coat I knew ran $3,000 because that charge had cleared my supplementary card before I canceled it. Designer sunglasses, designer clutch held like body armor. Damon trailed out behind her, tugging at his blazer cuffs. Every inch the polished executive. A man performing success for an invisible audience. The two of them were grinning deep in conversation about mimosas and eggs. Benedict completely blissfully unaware that the cards in their wallets were worthless and the floor was already giving way beneath them. They cut across toward the detached 3-car garage. I toggled to the driveway camera. Damon punched in the code. The heavy door groaned and started climbing. I set my coffee mug down on the armrest. This was it. The door rolled all the way up. Morning light poured into the garage and lit up nothing. The bay where Kendall's Porsche Macon usually gleamed sat bare. Just oil stains on the concrete and a fresh pair of deep tire ruts where a tow truck had dragged the thing out by its axle sometime before dawn. Kendall went rigid. Both hands flew to her face. Her clutch hit the pavement. Damon bolted into the empty space, turning in frantic circles like a 2-ton vehicle might somehow be wedged in a shadow. Then he burst back out to the driveway neck, craning both ways down the street. I cranked the volume. "Where is it? Where is the car?" He was screaming raw, desperate like a kid whose favorite toy had vanished on Christmas morning. Kendall's poise vaporized on the spot. "Somebody took it." "Oh my God, Damon, somebody took my Porsche. Get the police on the phone. Call 911 this second. were being targeted. I took a slow sip of coffee, rich and bitter. Just right. They were convinced they were crime victims. What they actually were was consequence victims. I watched Damon wrestle his phone out with trembling hands, nearly fumbling it into the snow. He started pacing in tight circles, jabbing his foot at the ground. "They came onto our property. They took our car," he shouted into the phone. "My wife is terrified. Get someone out here now." I closed the app. I didn't need to sit through the waiting part. I already knew the response time in that neighborhood ran under 5 minutes. Let the dread settle in first. I wandered to the kitchen window and stood looking out at my backyard, frost dusting the grass, everything still and unhurried. Everything I could see belonged to me, free and clear. No mortgage, no partner, no obligation. That kind of freedom was something Damon had never had to wrestle for because I'd handed him everything. That era was finished. 10 minutes on, I pulled up the app again. A patrol cruiser sat in their driveway, lights flashing silently. An officer stood there with a notepad doing a poor job of hiding his boredom, while Kendall waved her arms at the empty garage. The tears had started, not the soft kind, but the furious, scalded kind that comes from a woman who feels the world has personally insulted her. "Officer, I need an APB issued immediately," she demanded. "White make and custom interior. It was parked right in that bay. Who in the world has the nerve to pull a car out of a gated community? "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to lower your voice," the officer said, holding up a hand. "Give me the plate number, the registration details, and the name of whoever holds the title." Damon stepped up, squaring his shoulders. "That's me. Well, my father technically manages the lease paperwork for tax reasons, but the car is mine. I'm the one who drives it." The officer jotted something down and retreated to his cruiser. I noticed the neighborhood starting to stir. Across the street, curtains shifted. Mrs. Calloway, notorious on the block for her encyclopedic knowledge of other people's business, had materialized on her porch in a bathrobe, ostensibly collecting a newspaper that had been sitting there since early morning. She wasn't missing a thing. Kendall had always craved this street as her stage. Now she was the tragedy playing on it. The officer came back, and something about his posture had shifted. Notepad closed, pen pocketed, belt straightened. "Mr. Granger, Mrs. Granger, I need to inform you that no theft occurred here." Kendall's head snapped toward him. "Excuse me, the car is gone. How is that not a theft? Open your eyes." "Watch your tone, ma'am." His expression went cold. I pulled the VIN and ran the registration. That vehicle wasn't stolen. It was repossessed. Repossessed. Damon made a sound, half laugh, half choke. "That's not possible. The payments go out automatically. My father handles them. Something got crossed. There's been an error." "No error," the officer said, off voice like a closed door. "The repossession order was submitted this morning by the vehicle's legal owner, a Mr. Everett Granger. He flagged the car as being used without proper authorization and invoked his right to reclaim it. The tow operator documented the retrieval at 8:15 a.m. Everything was done by the book." The quiet that fell after those words had mass to it. I watched the blood leave Kendall's face. Her eyes swept the driveway, Mrs. Calloway on the porch. The landscapers 2 doors down propped on their rakes, every set of eyes pointed her direction. The shame rolled over her in a visible wave. Repossessed. It was a dirty word in their world. It meant failure. It meant poverty. "Your father," she said, turning slowly toward Damon, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your father arranged this. He had my car taken." Damon looked gutted. He glanced at the officer, then at the bare garage floor, then at his wife. He had nothing to offer any of them. The officer touched the brim of his hat. "No crime, no report, I'm clearing the call. You folks have a good day." He reversed out, and the cruiser was gone. Kendall's composure went with it. She spun and drove both palms into Damon's chest hard enough to rock him back. "You swore to me he was harmless. You said he'd never pull something like this. He just dragged us through the mud in front of everyone on this street. You fix this Damon right now." She wheeled around, blew through the front door, and slammed it hard enough to send the wreath tumbling to the ground. Damon stayed in the driveway alone, January air slicing through his expensive coat. He reached for his phone. Mine lit up at the same moment. I checked the screen. "Son," I gave it 2 rings. "Hello, Damon." "Dad, have you lost your mind?" His voice was splintering. "The police just left our house. You sent a tow truck for the car. Kendall is completely falling apart in there. The whole block watched it happen." You made me look like I can't provide for my own family. You humiliated me. I settled back into my recliner. Didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. I didn't make you look like anything, Damon. The position you're in is one you built yourself the moment you started taking bites out of the hand that was feeding you. The vehicle title is mine. The lease agreement is mine. The insurance policy is mine. You were an authorized driver, nothing more. That authorization ended this morning. You gave us that car, he shouted. I gave you the use of it, I said. Same as I gave you the use of that house. Same as I gave you access to my credit. Those were gifts extended to my son and his wife. But since it seems I'm not considered family anymore, I don't see why my property should enjoy the hospitality your household won't extend to me. This is pettiness pure and simple, Damon snapped. You're upset about Christmas. We wanted one quiet day to ourselves, and you're blowing up our lives over it. Kendall depends on that car. She's an influencer, Dad. She can't show up somewhere in an Uber. Bring it back, do that, and maybe we talk about having you over for New Year's. I laughed, not warmly. You genuinely believe you have leverage here, that you can put your company on the table and negotiate with me? You've badly miscalculated your own worth, son. You know what you are, Damon shot back. You're a bitter, lonely old man who can't stand that we have a life that doesn't revolve around you. This ends right now. Agreed, I said. It ends right now. A beat of silence. His breathing filled the line, uneven, ragged. Then his voice dropped to something darker, quieter. The register of a man who's decided to fight dirty. All right, Dad. You want this to be a war? Then let's go. You pulled the car fine. You're cutting us off fine. But you'd better think hard about what you're doing, because you have a grandson. You have Theo. And if you believe for 1 second you'll ever lay eyes on that boy again, you are out of your mind. My blood went cold. I held the phone so tight I heard the case flex. Theo, my sweet innocent grandson, who curled up in my lap while I read him stories. Theo, the child I was quietly building a trust fund for. And now Damon was pointing that boy at me like a weapon. What did you just say? I asked. My voice had dropped to barely a whisper. You heard me, Damon said, and I could hear the smirk riding under every word. He thought he'd found the crack in my armor, thought he'd just played the ace. I'm his father. I decide who gets access to him, and I'm making that call right now. As long as you're holding that car and acting like a tyrant, you're dead to him. No visits, no calls, no photos, nothing. You wanted to be alone. Dad, congratulations. You're alone. My vision went sideways. The same red fury I'd felt on the highway surged back, only darker this time. Deeper. He was ransoming my own blood for a Porsche. He was ready to carve out the bond between a grandfather and his grandson over a leased vehicle. Is that your final move, Damon? I said. You sure you want to step onto this road because there's no walking it back? I'm sure, he said. Have the car back by noon or say goodbye to Theo, permanently. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I pressed the red button and the line went dead. I sat in the silence of my living room. My eyes burned. My heart knocked out a slow, thick beat against my ribs. He had stepped across the one line I considered sacred and ground it into the dirt of his own selfishness. He believed the threat would break me. He believed he could bludgeon me into surrendering. He was wrong. What he had actually done was cut the last rope of mercy that had been holding my hand back. I looked at Theo's photo on the mantel and touched the frame. I'm sorry, little man, I said quietly. This is going to get ugly, but your daddy has a lesson coming that he will not soon forget. I rose from the chair and walked to my desk, unlocked the top drawer and lifted out a thick red file, the one labeled Oakwood Drive mortgage note. I opened it, ran my eyes over the promissory note over the wet ink of the signature. Damon Granger. I picked up the phone and dialed Conrad Waverly. Do it, I said when he answered. Do what Everett Waverly asked? All of it. File the foreclosure. Have the eviction notice served. Cut the utilities. Freeze the trust. Burn it down, Conrad. He used the boy. A pause stretched across the line. Then Waverly's voice came back low and steady. Understood. I'm filing the paperwork now. The process server will be at the door within the hour. I hung up. This had moved past money. It was about survival now, and I was the only person standing in this fight who had ever learned to survive with nothing. Damon was about to find out what a real winter felt like. I sat in my home office surrounded by the mahogany shelves that held the real record of my life. The trembling fury from the call had cooled and compressed into something hard and cold and precise. Damon had made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed that threatening to cut me off from Theo was a power move. What he failed to see was that, by severing the emotional tie, he had also torn away the only thing that had been keeping my business instincts in check. I looked over at the wall safe behind the desk. Inside sat the ledgers for Granger Holdings, LLC, the private equity firm I had assembled over 40 years. Damon believed I was a retired man scraping along on a pension. He had no idea my net worth sat north of $20 million, or that I held the paper on half the commercial strip malls in the county. He had looked at me and seen a father to be managed. I looked at him now and saw a delinquent asset that needed to be resolved. I reached for my Mont Blanc pen, the one reserved for acquisitions, and pulled a fresh legal pad across the desk. I was done being a parent. I was a creditor now, and creditors don't operate on feelings. They operate on terms and conditions. I opened the thick red file and ran my finger down the fine print of the mortgage agreement. I knew precisely what I was hunting for. When I bought the debt on Damon's house, I kept the standard banking covenants intact to protect the investment. I never imagined I'd turn them on my own son. But there it was. Clause 17, Section B. Unauthorized structural modifications. 6 months ago, Damon had bragged about gutting the load-bearing wall in his garage to install a mirrored gym for Kendall. He'd sent me pictures of the demolition. Never pulled a permit. Never asked the lien holder for approval. That was a material breach of contract, the legal equivalent of handing me a loaded weapon and walking away. I rang Conrad Waverly. He picked up on the first ring, already knowing the temperature had risen. "Draft the letter, you Conrad." I said, no warmth anywhere in my voice. "We're activating the acceleration clause. Immediately." "On what grounds?" Waverly said. "The insurance lapse will hold up, but a judge could give him 30 days to cure it. We need something that sticks right now. Structural damage and unauthorized modification," I said. "He compromised the integrity of the collateral when he tore out that garage wall. I have the photographs he sent me himself. It's a direct violation of the preservation of property clause. Demand full payment of the principal balance with interest and penalties. $1.2 million due upon receipt." Waverly let out a low whistle. "Everett, that is a nuclear option. Acceleration clauses belong in commercial defaults. If we serve him with this, he either pays the entire mortgage on the spot, or we foreclose. He can't just clear the arrears he has to buy the house outright." "I know what it means," I said, cutting him off. "I wrote the contract. Send it via courier. I want it in his hands within the hour, and Conrad add a personal note from the lender. Inform him that any attempt to liquidate fixtures or appliances to raise cash will be treated as theft of collateral." I ended the call and turned back to the computer. I pulled up the loan servicing dashboard and watched the account status flip from current to default. One mouse click. But it felt like dropping an iron gate. Damon had wanted to play the big man. He'd wanted to exile his own father. He'd wanted to hold a child hostage. Now he was about to learn that every beam and shingle over his head had been standing on my goodwill, and that goodwill was gone. I leaned back in my leather chair. I was not happy. There was a deep hollow ache sitting behind my sternum, but alongside it was the grim steadying satisfaction of a man who finally respects himself enough to stop absorbing punishment. 5 miles away, the hammer was already swinging. I checked the GPS tracker on the family account. Another line item Damon had conveniently forgotten I was paying for. They were at Whole Foods. Of course they were. No car, so they'd grabbed an Uber. They were attempting to rescue their Christmas brunch. I could picture it without even trying. Kendall in her oversized sunglasses projecting composure she didn't have after the humiliation of the tow truck. Her parents, Gerald and Carolyn, moving through the aisles behind her, dropping things in the cart without glancing at the price tags because they still assumed the Granger money train was running on schedule. I could see the whole scene. Imported cheeses, truffle oil, organic cuts, and name-brand champagne. A cart stacking up toward $500 worth of groceries built on borrowed confidence. Kendall was likely venting to her mother about me in a low hiss, calling me petty, calling me vindictive, while tossing a $50 candle into the basket. Damon was probably a half step behind them, eyes on his phone, still waiting for me to fold, still convinced this was a temporary standoff. He hadn't grasped yet that he'd been expelled, not punished. They made it to checkout. I watched the transaction attempt hit my monitor in real time. The cashier, probably someone working 2 jobs just to stay even, would be scanning the hall. Beep, beep, beep. The total climbing. $300, $400, $580. Damon would step forward. He'd produce the Black Amex Platinum, the supplementary card tethered to my account, and pass it across with that casual, effortless arrogance he'd been wearing ever since he married Kendall. Wouldn't even glance at the total. The cashier would swipe it. And then silence. No confirmation beep. Instead, a low, flat buzz. Declined. The notification surfaced on my screen a moment later. Transaction denied. Reason account closed by primary administrator. I leaned forward and shut my eyes, filling in the picture. Damon would look confused. He'd laugh that tight, nervous sound and say, "Try it again." The chip is finicky. The cashier swiped it again, declined. "Sir, the machine is showing this account as closed." She announced loud enough that the people stacking up behind them caught every word. "That is impossible," Damon would snap. "My father covers this card. It carries a $50,000 limit. Key it in manually." The cashier shook her head. "I can't do that, sir. The system is flagging the card for confiscation." Damon's face drained of color. Kendall stepped in. "Just pull out your other card, Damon." The Visa. He fished it out of his wallet. Declined. Over limit. He tried his debit card next. Declined. Insufficient funds. The line behind them was growing impatient. People shifted their weight, exhaled loudly, glanced at their phones. The heat of shame was already crawling up the back of Kendall's neck. Gerald Kendall's father cleared his throat. "What's the holdup, Damon? We have company coming." Damon turned to face his father-in-law, perspiration collecting on his brow. "Gerald, I think there's some kind of fraud alert on my accounts. The bank must have flagged them over unusual activity. Would you mind covering this one? I'll send you the money on Venmo the minute we're back at the house." That was the moment the whole tower came crashing down. Gerald Dutton, the man who had looked down on me, the man who called me a gardener, froze solid. He patted his pockets. He looked over at his wife Carolyn. "Oh, Damon, I didn't bring my wallet." Gerald would lie without blinking. "We left everything back at the house. We assumed you'd be picking up the tab since you invited us." I knew the truth. Gerald Dutton did not leave his wallet at home. His wallet was empty. His credit score was sitting somewhere in the fives. He was surviving on a stipend I quietly funneled to Kendall just to keep her from hounding Damon about her parents' financial ruin. The man couldn't have covered a pack of gum, let alone $600 worth of groceries. Kendall looked at her mother. "Mom, what about you?" Carolyn glanced away, suddenly fascinated by a magazine rack nearby. "I only kept enough cash for the Uber, dear." The cashier looked at them. The store manager was already making his way over. "Sir, if you're unable to pay for these items, we'll need to return them to the shelves. There are other customers waiting." The humiliation was absolute. The steaks, the wine, the cheese, all of it sat there on the counter. They would have to leave it all behind. They would have to walk the length of that checkout line past every pair of eyes watching them with nothing to show for it but empty hands. They pushed through the automatic doors into the biting cold of the parking lot. No Porsche waiting to swallow them up. They stood on the curb shivering while a rideshare app hunted down a stranger in a Honda Civic. I could practically hear Kendall's scream from miles away. It was the shriek of pure entitlement slamming headfirst into reality. "Why is this happening?" she cried, her voice fracturing. "Why won't the card work? Why would your father do this to us?" Damon didn't answer. He stood there staring at his banking app red zeros, stretching across every account. "Because he owns us, Kendall," he said barely above a whisper. "Because we never actually paid for any of it." Gerald Dutton scoffed, scrambling to recover his dignity. "This is completely unacceptable, Damon. Your father is a tyrant dangling money over your heads to keep you in line. You need to confront him." "Confront him with what?" Damon fired back, his composure gone. "What money, Gerald? You don't have any. I don't have any. He just cut us off." The car arrived, a battered sedan, with a dent creased into the bumper. They folded themselves inside 4 adults crammed across the back seat. Kendall was crying openly now. "How does he have this much power over us?" she sobbed. "He's just an old man. He lives in a little house. How can he just switch off our entire lives?" Damon stared out the window as the car eased away from the curb, and then he finally said what he'd been keeping from her and from himself. "Because he isn't just an old man, Kendall. He's the one who bought the debt. He's the one who signs every check. And I think we just figured out that we were never actually living our life. We were just being kept." I watched the GPS dot tracking their ride-share creep slowly back toward the house. A house that, inside of 30 minutes, would have a foreclosure notice taped to its front door. They were heading straight into a siege, and I was the general who had already called in the strike. Christmas Eve settled over my little neighborhood like a heavy quilt drawn tight. Inside my modest brick house, the air was warm and smelled of cinnamon, and the hickory smoke still woven into my clothes from that morning. I sat in the dark and watched the snow drift past the glow of the streetlights. I was eating the pulled pork alone. It was tender, pulling apart, at a touch seasoned just right, and yet it tasted like ash on my tongue. My phone rested on the table silent. I had turned off the notifications, but the screen kept flickering to life. Every few minutes, calls from blocked numbers, creditors the bank. Damon reaching out from a burner because I'd already shut down his regular line. I let them all go. I was finding a strange quiet in the solitude, a peace built on the firm foundation that I was, at long last, doing what was right. Then, at 8:15, the front gate buzzer cut through the stillness. I didn't rush. I finished my glass of water, folded the paper napkin across my mouth, and walked unhurried to the security monitor by the front door. The camera feed blinked on in black and white night vision. And there they were, Damon and Kendall huddled against the cold on the other side of my iron gate. Damon was holding Theo. My grandson was bundled in a heavy coat, his little face gone red from the chill, wearing the look of a boy who was confused and exhausted. Kendall was gripping a foil-wrapped dish that had store-bought fruitcake written all over it. But what snagged my attention was the background. Sitting at the curb with the engine still running, exhaust billowing white into the night air, was that same battered sedan from the grocery store. In the back seat, I could make out two shapes pressed together. Gerald and Carolyn Dutton. They hadn't even bothered to step out of the car, too proud to stand on my porch, but not too proud to eat my food if I swung the gate open. They'd sent my son and my grandson to the door like beggars while they stayed warm inside. It was a portrait of cowardice that made my jaw go tight. I pressed the intercom button. I did not unlock the gate. "Who is it?" I asked, my voice rough and broken up by the speaker. "It's us, Dad," Damon said, leaning toward the camera, his face warped by the wide-angle lens. "Open the gate. It's freezing out here. Theo is cold." I looked at my grandson. He didn't look happy. He looked like a prop in a production he had no part in choosing. A pang of guilt moved through me, but I pressed it down. I wasn't the one who had brought him out here in the cold. His father was. "I thought you wanted a private Christmas," I said. "Hey, Dad, please," Damon said. "Just open the gate." Then Kendall stepped forward. She nudged Damon aside and aimed herself straight at the camera lens. She switched on a smile so bright and so manufactured it was nearly painful to look at. "Hi, Pop," she said, using the name she knew I melted for when it came to Theo. "Look, we are so sorry about this morning. It was all just a big misunderstanding. Stress makes people say things they don't mean. We brought dessert. We just want to be together as a family. It's Christmas Eve. You shouldn't be sitting here alone." I listened to the whole pitch. It was smooth, well-rehearsed, and hollow to the core. She was trying to charm the gate open. She thought I was a lonely old man starved for whatever crumbs of affection she'd toss my way. She thought one bright smile could wipe the morning clean. "A misunderstanding," I repeated. "That's an interesting choice of word, Kendall. Is that what you call it when you tell your husband I smell like grease? Is that what you call it when you ban me from my own investment, Warst?" Kendall's smile slipped just a fraction of a second before she pulled it back into place. "Oh, Everett, you know how I get when I'm hosting. I just wanted everything to go perfectly. I didn't mean it the way it came out. We love you. We truly do. Please let us in. My parents are out in that car and they are just dying to meet you properly." I laughed, short and sharp. Dying to meet me. That's something, Kendall, because 2 hours ago, I was scrolling through Instagram. I saw your story, the one you put up from the Uber. Kendall's face went blank. Her eyes cut sideways. I pulled my phone from my pocket and held it close to the intercom microphone so she could hear every word. "Let me remind you," I said, "a photo of you looking pitiful in a back seat. Caption reads, 'Finally cutting out the toxic energy. Sometimes you have to leave the past behind to level up. Hashtag fresh start. Hashtag no more drama.'" I looked back at the monitor. Kendall had gone white. She had blocked me on Instagram months back, but she forgot I keep a burner account for monitoring my tenants. I see everything. "You posted that at 6 o'clock, I said. 2 hours ago, you were celebrating getting rid of me. You were calling me toxic. And now that you're cold and hungry and every card you own is dead, suddenly I'm family. Suddenly you want to walk through my front door. Everett, that had nothing to do with you. Kendall stammered, her voice climbing an octave. That was about work. I was venting about a client. Don't stand there and lie to me. My voice hit the intercom hard enough to make them both flinch. I am old, Kendall, but I am not a fool. You think I'm a senile checkbook? You think you can drag my name through the mud online and then show up at my gate because your parents are broke and you've run out of options? Existes be bones from me oars. Dad, enough! Damon cut in, stepping in front of Kendall and putting himself between her and the camera. His patience had burned off completely. The mask of the remorseful son dropped away, and what was underneath was the entitled brat I'd always known was there. His face was hard now. He looked like a man who wanted to break something. Open the damn gate, he shouted, rattling the iron bars with his foot. We are hungry. The fridge at the house is bare. We have no money for food because you shut everything down. You've made your point. Okay? You've shown us who holds the power. You've proven you're the boss. Now act like a father and let us in. My in-laws haven't had a meal since breakfast. I watched him throw his tantrum, 32 years old, kicking a gate in the snow because he had never once set aside money for a rainy day. He wasn't aching over my feelings. He wasn't sorry. He was just inconvenienced. Your in-laws are not my concern, I said, keeping my voice level. And truthfully, Damon, neither are you anymore. You are a grown man. If your fridge is empty, go to a store and fill it. Oh, right, you can't. Because you blew your paycheck leasing a car you couldn't afford to impress people who never gave a damn about you. Dad, Theo is crying, Damon shouted, pointing at the boy. You are hurting him? You are hurting him, I corrected. You brought him out into the cold to use him as a bargaining chip. If he was your real concern, you'd have taken him somewhere warm, a shelter, a friend's place, anywhere. Instead, you dragged him here to work on my conscience. Take him home, Damon. Put him to bed. We can't go home, Damon screamed. The power's out. You killed the power, didn't you? The whole house is freezing. I hadn't touched the power. That was either a lie, or the utility company had finally caught up with his delinquent bills all on its own. Either way, it had nothing to do with me. But I didn't bother setting the record straight. Figure it out, son, I said. That is what men do. They figure it out. Damon stared into the camera. His eyes were loaded with hate, pure, undiluted hatred. You are evil, he spat. You are a lonely, bitter old miser. I hope you choke on your money. I held his gaze for a long moment. I felt something, a deep sadness, but it sat far off the way grief feels when you look at an old photograph of someone already gone. The son I had raised was not standing at that gate. This man was a stranger. I am not evil, I said quietly. I am just closed for business. I picked up my phone and opened the banking app one last time. I pulled up Damon's personal checking account, keyed in the amount, and pressed transfer, $500. Then I hit the intercom again. I just sent you $500. Check your account. That's enough to buy buckets of chicken for you, your wife, and her parents. It's enough for a motel room tonight. Consider it a severance package. It's a severance, Damon shouted. Yes, I said. Take the money, feed your family, and Damon, hear me clearly. That eviction notice is real. You have until January 1st to be out of the property. If you are still there when New Year's Day comes, the sheriff will handle it. Dad, you can't, Damon started. I didn't let him finish. Merry Christmas, Damon. I reached over and threw the master switch on the exterior lights. The porch went dark. The floodlights over the driveway cut out. The only light left was the pale glow of the street lamp bouncing off the snow. On the monitor, I watched them stand there in the sudden blackness. Damon kicked the gate one final time. Kendall was sobbing into her hands. The car window came down, and Gerald Dutton thrust his head out, shouting something I couldn't make out. I switched off the monitor. The screen went dark. I walked back to my chair and lowered myself into the quiet. I picked up my rib bone. It had gone cold. I took a bite anyway. It tasted like victory, hard, dry, and necessary victory. Christmas morning used to start with Sam Cooke on the turntable and the smell of coffee steeping in the French press. This year, it started with the cold blue glow of a PDF lighting up my face in the dark of my study. I had brought in a private investigator named Desmond, usually the man I used for corporate background work, to dig into the Dutton family the moment I cut off the money. Desmond didn't sleep, and clearly neither did his network, because at 6 o'clock in the morning, my inbox chimed with a dossier thicker than a Bible and stuffed with just as many sins, I sipped black coffee and worked my way through the financial autopsy of Gerald and Carolyn Dutton. It was uglier than I'd expected. It was not just bad luck. It was systemic fraud. The report laid out a Chapter 7 bankruptcy filing from 5 years ago that they had kept carefully hidden from everyone in their social circle. They had carried over $300,000 in dischargeable debt, and they still owed the IRS $50,000 in back taxes. They had liens against a previous property in Florida. They were flat broke. But the part that truly turned my stomach was the cash flow analysis Desmond had assembled. He had cross-referenced Damon's spending patterns against the Duttons' lifestyle. The picture it painted was grotesque: the expensive dinners, the designer labels Kendall wore, the lease payments on Gerald's luxury sedan, even their health insurance premiums. All of it was flowing through Damon. And since Damon's salary was mediocre at best and largely swallowed by his own habit of gambling on cryptocurrencies, the math was clear. For 3 years, I had been single-handedly keeping 4 adults afloat. I wasn't just a father. I was a host organism feeding a family of parasites. I turned to the section marked Current Living Situation. The Duttons did not have a home in Georgia. They had been thrown out of their rental condo 2 months earlier. That was the real reason they were at Damon's house for Christmas. They weren't visiting. They had moved in. Kendall had cleared out my study, the room I stayed in when I came to visit, and turned it into a guest room for them. That was why they didn't want me there. There was no room for me because the leeches had claimed the host's bed. A vein pulsed in my temple. They had pushed me out of my own property to make space for the very people who looked down on me. Then I opened the audio file attached to the email. Desmond's note explained it had been captured the previous evening through a directional microphone aimed at the back patio of the Ridgecrest Way house, where Carolyn Dutton had slipped outside to smoke a cigarette and make a phone call. I put on my headphones. The audio was grainy but clear enough. Carolyn's voice was raw and sharp, nothing left of the practiced gentility she wore in public. She was talking to someone named Phyllis. I listened closely. "Yeah, we're stuck here," Carolyn said, exhaling smoke. "The old man cut us off. Can you believe the spite he froze the cards? We're eating KFC for Christmas dinner, Phyllis. It is humiliating, but don't worry, I have a plan. Kendall is too soft, but I told her we need to go on the offensive." I leaned in, my hand hovering over the volume. "He is 70 years old, Phyllis," Carolyn went on. "He lives alone. He's angry. We can use that. I told Kendall we should go for emergency guardianship. We claim he's suffering from dementia, that he's paranoid, that he's making irrational financial decisions that put his family at risk. If we get a doctor to sign off and land the right judge, we can seize control of his assets. We can lock him out of his own accounts. He is just a lonely old black man, Phyllis. The courts will side with a concerned young mother trying to protect her inheritance. We just need to paint him as senile and dangerous." Now, before we go further, what I uncovered in those next few hours changed the entire picture. The people I had welcomed closest to me had been moving against me in ways I had not yet fully seen. And before I tell you what that discovery set in motion, let me ask you this: if you learned someone under your own roof had been quietly working to undo, would you confront them immediately, or would you wait and build your case in silence? I pulled the headphones off slowly and set them on the desk. The room was utterly silent. They weren't just ungrateful, they were predatory. Carolyn Dutton was scheming to turn the legal system against me. She wanted to weaponize my age and my race as instruments of control. She wanted to park me in a facility or lock me under a conservatorship so she could bleed my accounts dry to cover her cigarettes and her husband's ascots. She wanted to make the law her leash around my neck. I didn't feel anger anymore. Anger runs hot. What moved through me instead was the absolute zero of deep space. The cold, clear calculation of a man who knows exactly where to aim. They wanted to use the law. Fine. I had written the law on that family. I picked up my phone and called Conrad Waverly. It was 7 a.m. on Christmas Day. I didn't care. Conrad picked up, his voice heavy with sleep. "Please tell me the house didn't burn down." "Not yet," I said, "but I need you to file a lawsuit today. Everett, the courts are closed." "Electronic filing runs 24/7, I said. "I want you to draft a complaint against Damon Granger. The charges are misappropriation of funds and breach of fiduciary duty." Waverly paused. "Fiduciary duty, Everett. He is your son, not your employee." "Wrong," I said. I pulled a document from my safe. 5 years ago, when I set up the trust that bankrolls his lifestyle, I made him the trustee of a sub-account. The bylaws spell it out clearly. Those funds are to be used exclusively for the upkeep of the primary residence and the education of his children. That means Theo. I looked back at the investigator's report. I have evidence, Waverly. I have proof he drew on trust funds to pay off Gerald Dutton's IRS tax lien. That is $50,000 in misappropriated money. That is felony-level theft dressed up as a family loan. He violated the trust indenture. Waverly was fully awake now. If we file this, Everett, we are effectively accusing him of embezzlement. That opens him up to criminal exposure, not just civil liability. I know, I said. File it. And I want a motion for an emergency accounting of all funds. I want his personal assets frozen until the audit wraps up. And Conrad, I want it served today. On Christmas, Waverly asked. They are plotting to have me declared incompetent, I said, keeping my voice low. They are moving to take my freedom. I am striking first. Call the process server. I will pay double the holiday rate. Get it to the house by noon. I hung up. I sat looking at the photo of Damon on my desk from his graduation. He looked so proud back then. I found myself wondering when he had turned into this hollowed-out man who stood by while his mother-in-law conspired against his own father. It didn't matter now. He had made his choices. Now he had to carry them. 5 hours later, the scene at 317 Ridgecrest Way was bleak. The heat had been cut hours earlier, leaving the house sitting at a chilly 50 degrees. Damon, Kendall, Gerald, and Carolyn were huddled around the kitchen island in their winter coats indoors. In the center of the island sat the buckets of fried chicken they'd purchased with my $500. It was a wretched feast. Grease stains on cardboard were the only decoration on the table. Theo was crying in the living room, swaddled in blankets, watching cartoons on a tablet that was slowly dying because the outlets had no power. The mood was poisonous. Carolyn was griping about the cold. Gerald was complaining about the quality of the wine they'd scraped together from a gas station. Kendall sat staring at the wall, eyes swollen and red. Damon was attempting to eat a drumstick and looked like a man chewing on broken glass. Then the doorbell rang. They all went still. Hope flared in Damon's eyes. Maybe it was me. Maybe I'd come around. Maybe I was pulling up with the heat and the Porsche and the money restored. I'll get it, Damon said, pushing back from the island. He crossed to the door and swung it open. He did not see his father. He saw a large man in a heavy parka holding a manila envelope. Damon Granger, the man asked. Yes, Damon said, bewildered. Merry Christmas, the man said. You've been served. He pressed the envelope against Damon's chest and turned, walking back down the snow-covered path. Damon stood there as the cold air poured into the hallway. He tore open the envelope. He drew out the thick stack of legal documents and let his eyes settle on the cover page. Superior Court. Plaintiff Everett Granger. Defendant Damon Granger. Cause of action, civil theft. Misappropriation of trust assets. Breach of fiduciary duty. Demand for damages, $1.5 million. Damon let the papers go. They drifted to the floor like dead leaves. He went down to his knees. The sound that came out of him was not a word. It was a guttural moan of total defeat. Kendall came running into the hallway. What is it, Damon? Is it your dad? Damon looked up at her, his eyes hollowed out. He is suing me, Kendall. He is suing me for everything. He knows about the money I sent to your parents. He knows all of it. Carolyn walked in, gnawing on a chicken wing. Sue him back, she said, mouth still full. Countersue the bastard. Damon looked at his mother-in-law, and for the very first time he saw her with clear eyes. He saw the greed. He saw the rot underneath it. Shut up, he whispered. Just shut up. We are going to jail. The wind screamed through the open door and sent snow skidding across the legal papers on the floor. The cold had finally made it inside. The audacity of desperation is something to behold. Most people, when handed a lawsuit for embezzlement while staring down an eviction retreat, they pack boxes. They call a lawyer. Kendall Granger, however, decided to throw a party. It was 7 o'clock in the evening on Christmas Day. The heat was still off, but they had lit a fire in the living room hearth and scattered candles throughout what she probably called ambiance, but was in practical terms survival. I sat in my car down the street and watched the guests file in, about 20 of them. Friends from Kendall's yoga studio, Damon's old college crowd, people they were trying to impress, or more likely people they were hoping to tap for money. I watched Kendall greet them at the door, in a fur coat over her cocktail dress, laughing too loud and too often. She was playing hostess on the deck of the Titanic. I checked my watch. 7:15, right on schedule. I stepped out of my truck. I wasn't alone. Flanking me were two men in dark suits carrying clipboards and rolls of neon orange stickers. They were asset recovery contractors I kept on call for commercial tenants who defaulted and tried to strip the fixtures on their way out. Tonight, they were my reapers. We walked up the driveway together, boots crunching through the snow. The music thumping from inside was festive, a cheerful soundtrack masking the sound of a life coming apart. I did not knock. I used my key, the one Damon believed he had changed, but which was part of a master key system I had installed when I purchased the property. The door swung open. The warmth of the fireplace hit me along with the smell of cheap wine and quiet desperation. The room went silent in an instant. 20 heads turned at once. Kendall froze mid-laugh, her glass raised in a toast. Damon, who had been pouring drinks in the corner, dropped the bottle. It exploded against the hardwood floor, a sharp crack that rang out in the stillness. "Good evening," I said. I didn't shout, I projected. It was the voice I'd used for years to clear a warehouse floor. "Please don't let me interrupt. I'm simply here to conduct an inventory." Before anyone found their voice, I nodded to my men. They moved with quiet, efficient precision. They walked into the living room, paying no mind to the guests, and began their work. Without a word, they crossed to the furniture, the electronics, the art hanging on the walls, and pressed a bright orange sticker onto each item. "Property of Granger Holdings, LLC. Do not remove." One man tagged the 75-inch television while a guest was still watching the football game. Another slapped a sticker on the leather sectional, right beside where Carolyn Dutton was sitting, forcing her to scramble out of the way. I walked to the mantel and placed a sticker on the expensive abstract painting Kendall had bought with my money. "What do you think you're doing?" Kendall shrieked, storming toward me. Get out of my house. You cannot do this. We have guests." I turned to face her. "This is not your house, Kendall," I said, calm and even. "And that is not your art. It is collateral. And since your husband is currently named in a lawsuit for misappropriating the funds used to acquire these items, I am securing my assets before you get the idea to move them on Facebook Marketplace." The guests began to murmur. Phones were coming out across the room. People were recording. This was the social death Kendall feared more than poverty itself. Gerald Dutton. Kendall's father shoved his way through the crowd. His face was crimson, and he was swaying on his feet, reeking of the cheap brandy he'd been nursing since morning. He'd found his nerve at the bottom of a bottle. "Now you listen here, you son of a bitch," he slurred, jabbing a trembling finger in my direction. "You cannot barge into this house and terrorize my daughter. I know my rights. This is trespassing. Get out before I throw you out." He lunged at me. It was a clumsy telegraph swing. I didn't even blink. One of my asset recovery men, a former linebacker named Brick, stepped between us. He caught Gerald's fist in his open palm like he was catching a baseball. A slight twist, and Gerald yelped in pain, dropping to his knees. Brick looked to me for direction. I shook my head. "Let him go." Brick released his grip. Gerald stumbled back, clutching his wrist chest, heaving. He glared up at me with pure venom. "I am going to sue you," he spat. "I am going to take everything you have." I crossed the floor toward him. I crouched down until my face was inches from his and dropped my voice to where only he could hear it. It was a whisper built to destroy. "You are going to sue me, Gerald," I said, "like you sued the insurance company in Florida in 2017. The arson case, the one where the warehouse burned down 3 days after you raised the policy limits." Gerald went rigid. His eyes went wide. Every drop of color left his face, leaving him looking like wet dough. "I know about the settlement, Gerald," I continued. "I know you paid off the investigator to call it inconclusive, and I know the statute of limitations on insurance fraud hasn't run out yet. Do you really want to bring the law into this? Because I have the file right here on my phone. One tap, and it lands on the FBI field office in Miami." Gerald Dutton opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked at his wife. He looked at his daughter. Then he looked at the floor. He backed away from me, stumbling over his own feet, retreating into the shadows of the kitchen. He was neutralized. I straightened up and faced the room. The silence was total. Even the music had died. Damon was standing near the broken wine bottle, looking like a ghost. Kendall was crying softly into her hands. The guests stood, frozen eyes wide. I walked over to the karaoke machine Kendall had set up, picked up the microphone, and tapped it twice. Thump, thump, the sound rolled through the house. "Attention, everyone!" I said, my voice filling every corner of the room. "The party is over. The individuals hosting you tonight are currently under investigation for civil theft and fraud. The food you've been eating was purchased with stolen funds. The chairs beneath you are property of the bank." I paused and let my eyes move across the room, settling on each face in turn. "Anyone still on these premises in 5 minutes will be considered complicit in trespassing and unlawful occupation. The police are on their way to secure the property. I strongly suggest you leave now." It was a stampede. No goodbyes, no thank yous. Coats were snatched, purses flew. People nearly sprinted for the door, desperate to put distance between themselves and the wreckage of scandal. Within 2 minutes, the house was empty except for the family. The front door gaped open, letting the freezing air pour in, snuffing out the candles one by one. I set the microphone down and looked at Damon. He was on the floor, surrounded by shards of glass and orange stickers staring at the wall. He didn't look up. He was broken. I nodded to my men. "We're done here." We walked back out into the cold night, leaving them in the ruins of everything they had pretended to be. The house was tagged. The guests were gone. The reputation was ash. Merry Christmas. The morning of December 26th arrived under a gray sky, heavy with the promise of more snow. I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh pot of coffee and a list of phone numbers in front of me. Most people spend the day after Christmas resting or standing in return lines. I was spending it restoring my life to its original settings. I spread the utility bills for the Ridgecrest Way House across the table. Electric, gas, water, internet. Every single account was in my name. When I had purchased the property, I set up the utilities myself to make sure everything was running before Damon moved in. Damon, being Damon, had never bothered to transfer a single one into his own name. He simply enjoyed the lights, the heat, and the high-speed Wi-Fi, without once pausing to wonder where any of it came from. For 3 years, I had been the invisible engine powering his entire world. Today, I was switching it off. I called the power company first and worked my way through the automated menu until I reached a live person. "Good morning," I said, keeping my voice crisp and even. "I am the account holder for the property at 317 Ridgecrest Way. The property is being vacated. I'd like to request an immediate termination of service." The representative hesitated. "Sir, it is the middle of winter. We generally advise keeping the heat active to prevent the pipes from freezing." "I am aware of the risks," I said. "I am the owner of the property and I am authorizing the shutoff. Turn it off today." I repeated the same call with the gas company, then the water department, then the cable provider. It took less than an hour. By 10 o'clock in the morning, I had methodically cut every lifeline that connected that house to the modern world. I wasn't doing this to be cruel. I was doing it because a tenant who sues his landlord does not get to enjoy radiant floor heating. I was doing it because they needed to understand that civilization runs on money and they had none. I pictured the moment the invisible current stopped the refrigerator's hum, dying mid-cycle, the furnace pilot light, winking out the router in the hallway, going dark and silent. It was a quiet catastrophe, the sound of reality finally crashing through the walls of their fantasy. I poured myself another cup of coffee. My house was warm, my lights were on, I had paid my bills. By noon, the temperature inside the Ridgecrest Way House had begun equalizing with the air outside, 20 degrees Fahrenheit. The insulation I had paid for was solid, but no insulation holds back winter indefinitely without a heat source. I checked the security cameras one last time before the internet cut out. I could see them on the feed piled together in the living room, wrapped in every blanket they could find. Then the screen went black. Connection lost. I didn't need a camera to know what was unfolding inside. I understood the physics of a freezing house, and I understood the psychology of a family cracking apart under pressure. The chaos I imagined started in the master bathroom. Kendall had tried to take a hot shower to wash off the humiliation of the lawsuit and the disaster of the party. She turned the handle. There might have been a moment of residual warm water left in the tank, but it would have gone cold within seconds. I could picture her scream bouncing off the marble tiles I had paid for. She would wrap herself in a towel, shivering her wet hair, going stiff in the cold air. She would rush into the bedroom, expecting the heat to be pumping from the vents, and find nothing but cold, stale air pouring through. Then she'd come, tearing downstairs. Damon fixed the heat. Damon fixed the water. Damon. Why is the internet down? I can't check my notifications. Damon would be frantic, running to the thermostat, yanking open the breaker box, trying to reboot the router. He'd find every screen blank, the pilot light extinguished, and he'd understand this wasn't a malfunction. It was an eviction. In the kitchen, Gerald and Carolyn Dutton would be coming apart. Gerald complaining he couldn't brew his tea. Carolyn wailing that her electric blanket had gone dead. They would turn on Damon like a pack of wolves. "You are useless," Gerald would shout, his breath hanging visible in the freezing air. "You cannot even keep the lights on. What kind of man are you? We are freezing to death inside a mansion. You promised us a life of luxury, and you have given us a refugee camp." Damon would try to explain himself, his teeth chattering. "It's my father. He cut everything off. He controls the accounts." "Then pay the bill yourself, you idiot," Carolyn would screech. "Call them. Put it in your name." "I can't," Damon would shout back. "I have no money. He froze my accounts. I can't put down a deposit. I cannot do anything." The house would ring with their accusations bouncing off the walls. They were trapped inside a beautiful, expensive icebox. The art, the designer furniture, the soaring ceilings, none of it mattered now. You cannot eat a painting. You cannot burn a leather sofa for warmth with any real efficiency. They were discovering the hierarchy of needs firsthand, and they were pinned at the very bottom of it. And in the middle of all of it was Theo, my 5-year-old grandson. He didn't care about lawsuits or trusts or anyone's pride. He just knew that his toes hurt. He knew that his tablet wouldn't turn on. He knew that his parents were screaming at each other, and that his grandparents were watching his father with open contempt. He was crying a low, miserable wail that nobody was moving to answer because they were all too busy pointing fingers over who had brought them to this frozen ruin. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was Damon. I looked at the caller ID. I let it ring. I wanted him to sit in it. I wanted the cold to work its way deeper into his bones. It stopped. Then it rang again immediately. I picked up. "What?" I said. "Dad." Damon's voice was unrecognizable. The shouting was gone. The demands were gone. He was shaking. I could hear the tremor working through his jaw. "Dad, please. It is 40 degrees inside the house. We can see our breath. The water is off. The toilets won't flush." "Ah, that is what happens when the bills don't get paid, Damon," I said, keeping my voice even. "Dad, we are freezing," Damon said, and then his voice gave out. He started to sob, not the hot, angry tears of a man who lost a car, but the terrified weeping of a man who cannot protect his child. "Theo is crying, Dad. His lips are turning blue. He is buried under 3 blankets and he won't stop shivering. I do not care what happens to me. I do not care about Kendall, but Theo is suffering. Please, Dad. He is just a little boy." I closed my eyes. The image of my grandson shivering in the dark cut straight through whatever was left of my resolve. I was a hard man. I was a businessman. But I was not a monster. I had made my point. The adults had been punished. The child had absorbed more than enough of the wreckage. "Is he there with you?" I asked. "Yes," Damon sniffled. "He is right here." "Bring him to me," I said. "What?" Damon asked, thrown off. "Bring Theo to my house. Pack a bag for him, his toys, his warm clothes. Get in the car and bring him here right now. I have heat, I have hot water, I have food." "Okay," Damon said, relief flooding into his voice. "Okay, we are coming. We'll get our things together and be there in 20 minutes. Thank you, Dad. Thank you." "Stop," I said. My voice landed like a whip crack. "Not we, Damon. Him. Just Theo." Silence on the line. The wind howled in the background. "What?" Damon whispered. "You are not welcome in my house," I said. "Neither is your wife, and certainly not her parasites. You made your bed, Damon. You can freeze in it. But I will not let my grandson suffer for your incompetence. Bring the boy, drop him at the gate, and then go." "But Dad," Damon pleaded, "we will die out here. It is going to be 10 degrees tonight." "And then find a shelter," I said. "Go to a church. Go to hell for all I care. But you are not stepping foot inside my home. You sued me, Damon. You tried to steal from me. You do not get to warm your hands at my fire. Now, do you want Theo to be warm, or do you want to use him as a human shield again? Make a choice." Damon drew a ragged breath. I could hear Kendall shrieking in the background, demanding to know what I'd said. I could hear Gerald bellowing something about his rights. "I will bring him," Damon said quietly. "I will bring him right now." "Good," I said. "The gate will be open for the boy. Only the boy." I hung up. I walked to the thermostat and turned the heat up 2 degrees. I went to the kitchen and set a kettle on for hot chocolate. I was ready to be a grandfather. I was done being a father to a snake. The morning of December 27th brought a slight thaw in the weather, but a deep freeze in my legal situation. I was in the library sitting with a book on Stoic philosophy when the doorbell rang. It wasn't a friend, it was a process server handing me a thick packet of documents with a smirk that told me he knew exactly what was inside. I shut the door and carried the envelope to my desk. I didn't need to read the cover page to know what it was, but I read it anyway. Superior Court of Georgia Family Division. Plaintiff Kendall Granger, Defendant Everett Granger, Nature of Action, Constructive Trust, and Equitable Distribution of Marital Assets. I laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound that went nowhere in the empty room. Kendall had done the unthinkable. She had hired a lawyer, not a good one. I recognized the name on the letterhead immediately, Arlo Finney, a strip mall attorney whose face was plastered across billboards along the highway, usually advertising slip-and-fall claims or DUI defense. He was cheap, he was aggressive, and he was clearly chasing a payday. Kendall was suing me for ownership of the house. Her argument was laughable, but I'll give her this, it had nerve. She claimed that because she had selected the paint colors, because she had hosted gatherings there, and because she had treated the property as her primary residence, she had developed an equitable interest in it. She argued the house was a gift to the couple, and that my move to foreclose was nothing more than a vindictive act of alienation. She was asking a judge to hand her the title. She wanted a court to award her the property I had paid $1.2 million for simply because she had occupied it for 3 years. I picked up the phone and called Conrad Waverly. "Did you see it?" I asked. "Reading it now?" Waverly said, his voice thick with disdain. "It is a frivolous motion, Everett. No legal foundation whatsoever. The deed is held in the LLC's name. There is no written agreement promising them the property. It will be dismissed." "I know it will," I said. "But she is trying to stall. She wants to drag this into a long litigation so she can keep living in that house while the courts crawl along. She wants to force a settlement. She thinks I will pay her to disappear." "Yes, she is wrong," Waverly said. "Set up a meeting," I said. "Today. Call Finney. Tell him we are open to discussing a settlement. Tell him to bring his clients to your office at 2 o'clock. "You want to settle?" Waverly asked, surprised. "No," I said. "I want to end it. I want them in a room, Conrad. I want to be looking them in the eye when the guillotine falls." At 1:55, I walked into the conference room at Waverly and Associates. The room was built to intimidate. The table was a 20-foot slab of polished mahogany. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline. I took the chair at the head of the table. Waverly settled into my right. 3 neat stacks of folders sat on the table in front of us. At 2 o'clock on the dot, the door opened. Kendall entered first, wearing a black dress and dark sunglasses, trying to project the air of a grieving widow or a celebrity walking into a courthouse. Damon followed behind her. He looked wrecked. 3 days of stubble, a wrinkled hoodie jeans. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Behind them came Arlo Finney, a short man in a suit that didn't quite fit, lugging a briefcase that appeared to be made of synthetic leather. They sat down. Finney cleared his throat and began shuffling papers in his briefcase with the performance of a man trying to look organized. "Gentlemen," Finney began, his voice smooth and practiced, "I appreciate you agreeing to this meeting. My client, Mrs. Granger, has endured significant emotional distress as a result of your tactics. We believe a settlement serves the interests of all parties. We are prepared to drop the lawsuit in exchange for the deed to the Ridgecrest Way property and a cash settlement of $200,000 for pain and suffering." I stared at him. I did not blink. Then I looked at Kendall. Her chin was raised, jaw set. She genuinely believed she was owed this. She believed she was entitled to the fruit of my life's work. Waverly leaned forward. He didn't look at Finney. He looked at Damon. "Damon," Waverly said softly, "do you know where the money for that house actually came from?" Damon looked up, his eyes red. "From my dad." Waverly opened the first folder. "Not exactly. The funds came from the Granger Family Trust, specifically from the principal capital account. Your father is the grantor and the sole trustee. The trust bylaws state that any distribution of real estate assets must be for the sole benefit of the named beneficiaries. You are a beneficiary, Damon, but Kendall is not." Finney cut in. "That is a technicality. They are married. What is his is hers." Waverly ignored him. He pushed a document across the table. It was a bank transfer receipt from 3 years ago. "This is the wire transfer for the purchase of the house. Bank confirmed $1.2 million sent directly from Everett Granger's private equity account. Damon had not contributed a single cent. Not toward the down payment, not the closing costs, not the insurance. There is no marital asset because the marriage never paid for any of it. It is a corporate asset held by a company you have no ownership stake in. Kendall slammed her palm down on the table. That house was a gift. He gave it to us. He called it our house. I spoke up for the first time. I called it your house, Kendall, because I wanted you to feel welcome. I did not give it to you. I let you stay there. And just like a borrowed book, when you abuse the privilege, it gets returned. Finney tried to wrestle control of the room back. We have witnesses who will testify it was intended as a gift. We will take this to trial. It could drag on for years. Go right ahead, I said. But before you do, you might want to look at the second file. Waverly slid it across the table, thinner than the first, but far more lethal. He opened it to reveal a photocopy of a withdrawal slip. Last month, Waverly said, on November 15th, a withdrawal was made from Mr. Granger's private retirement pension fund. The amount was $20,000. The signature at the bottom reads Everett Granger. I looked over at Kendall. She went rigid. Waverly pressed on. However, Mr. Granger was in Charlotte that day meeting with investors. He could not have signed that check. We pulled the security footage from the bank branch where the check was cashed. Waverly produced a photograph. It was a grainy black and white still from a security camera. A woman stood at the teller window. She wore sunglasses, but her face came through clearly enough. It was Kendall. This is felony forgery and grand larceny. Waverly's voice landed like a hammer blow. You forged your father-in-law's signature to steal $20,000 from a federally protected retirement account, one that carries a mandatory prison sentence. Minimum 5 years, Kendall. Kendall began to shake. Finney studied the photo, then looked at his client. He closed his folder. Mrs. Granger. Is this true? Finney asked, all the bluster gone from his voice. She said nothing. She just stared at the photograph. Damon reached across and picked it up. His hands were trembling. You stole from him, Damon whispered. You told me that money came from your modeling gig. You told me you booked a campaign. You stole it. I needed it. Kendall hissed, wheeling on him. For my parents, they needed to pay off a loan shark. You were broke, Damon? What was I supposed to do? Waverly cut in. We have already drafted the criminal complaint. We can file it with the district attorney this afternoon, or you can drop your lawsuit, vacate the house immediately, and sign a full release of all claims. Finney rose to his feet. I cannot be party to this. If criminal liability is on the table, I am done. I am withdrawing as counsel. He snatched his briefcase and left the room without a backward glance. Kendall sat there alone, exposed, and with no one left in her corner. But I wasn't finished. I had one more file. The third file. The one that would make certain she never troubled my son again. There is one more matter, I said. Kendall looked at me, her eyes flooding with terror. What else do you want? You've won. I'll sign. I want to talk about your parents, I said. Gerald and Carolyn Dutton. Kendall's expression shifted. What about them? They're broke. You know that. I know they're broke, I said. But I also know they are not Americans. Waverly opened the third file. Inside were copies of passports. British passports. Your parents entered this country on tourist visas 10 years ago, Waverly said, reading from the file. They overstayed. They have been living here illegally for a decade, working under the table, and keeping themselves off the government's radar. I leaned forward. 2 years ago when they went bankrupt and I bailed them out, I also took another step. I signed an affidavit of support form I-864. I sponsored them for a green card adjustment. I gave the government my word that they would not become a public charge. Kendall's eyes went wide. You sponsored them, I did, I said. Because Damon asked me to? Because he said they were family. But here is what you need to understand about sponsorship, Kendall. It is voluntary and it can be pulled if the sponsor has reason to believe the applicants are engaged in fraud. I drew a letter from the file. It was addressed to the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. This is a formal withdrawal of my sponsorship. I said it also documents their bankruptcy fraud and their tax evasion in detail. Once I send this, your parents lose their protection. They will be placed in removal proceedings. They will be deported. Kendall's parents back to England with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Kendall made a sound like a wounded animal. No, you can't. My mother is sick. They have nothing in England. You would destroy them. They destroyed themselves, I said. They raised a thief. They leached off my son. They plotted to put me in a home. I am just filing the paperwork. Damon looked at me. Dad, he said, his voice dropping low. Are you really going to deport them? I looked at my son. I could see the conflict written all over his face. He despised them, yet the sheer ruthlessness of the move had stunned him. That depends entirely on her, I said, and I pointed at Kendall. I pushed a document in front of her. It was a confession, a full admission of the forgery and the theft. Sign this, I said. Sign the confession. Admit to the theft. Agree to repay the $20,000. Agree to a full annulment of the marriage on the grounds of fraud. And agree to leave the state. Do that, and I will hold on to the immigration letter. I won't send it. But if you ever go near Damon or Theo again, if you ever try to come after me in court again, I will mail it, and I will hand this confession straight to the police. Kendall stared at the paper. Then she looked at Damon. He was not looking back at her. He was staring at his own hands. He was done. She picked up the pen. Her hand shook so violently she could barely form the letters. She signed her name. It is over, I said. Waverly collected the papers. Get out, he said to Kendall. She stood. She looked small. She looked broken. She walked out of the room, leaving her husband and her future on the table behind her. Damon remained at the far end of that massive table, alone. The room was utterly silent. I got up and moved to the window. I looked out over the city. It was a cold, hard world beyond that glass, but in here, it was finally clean. The temperature inside the house at 317 Ridgecrest Way had fallen to 38 degrees, but the heat pouring out of the kitchen was enough to burn the whole place down. I had driven over to the property to oversee the final eviction, but instead, I found myself standing in the darkened hallway, listening to the sound of people turning on one another. Damon had come back from the meeting at the law firm, looking like a man who had just walked through a minefield. Kendall had followed him, in mascara streaked down her face, the signature on that confession letter, searing a hole straight through her conscience. In the kitchen, Gerald and Carolyn Dutton were huddled around a single camping lantern Gerald had dug out of the basement. They had on every coat they owned. When they saw Kendall walk in without a check, without a settlement, without so much as a partial win, whatever thin pretense of family unity they had been holding together collapsed on the spot. You signed it, Gerald screamed, his voice bouncing off the frozen granite countertops. You signed a confession. Are you out of your mind, girl? You just handed him everything he needs to have us deported. We trusted you to fix this. We trusted you to handle the old man. I handled him. Kendall shrieked back, her voice cracking under the strain. I kept us above water for 3 years, Dad. I stole for you. I lied for you. And what did you do? You drank wine and griped about the thermostat while I was out there committing felonies. You pushed me into this. You said he would never notice. You said he was senile. He is senile. Carolyn spat, yanking a blanket tighter around her shoulders. You simply have no backbone. You let him bully you into a corner. You should have cried harder. You should have threatened to hurt yourself. Men always fold when you make it dramatic enough. You are useless, Kendall. We raised you to marry money, and you picked a man whose father holds all the cards. Damon stood at the kitchen island, head down. He heard every word. For years he had gone to bat for these people. He had insisted to me they were refined. He had insisted they were just misunderstood. Now he was getting the raw, unvarnished version of the truth. They were not family. They were investors. And Kendall was a failed asset. Carolyn turned her venom on Damon. And you, she hissed. You are pathetic. You call yourself a man. You let your father freeze out your wife and her family. You let him take the car. You let him humiliate all of us. You should have hit him. You should have broken into that house and taken what was rightfully ours. Damon looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. Nothing belongs to us, Carolyn, he whispered. Not one thing. The house, the cars, the food, all of it was his. Oh, shut your mouth, Gerald groaned. Stop sniveling. Go sort this out. Go beg him. Get on your knees if that's what it takes. We need money, Damon. We need to get out of this country before immigration comes knocking at the door. Get us cash. Damon looked at Gerald. He looked at Carolyn, shivering in her greed. He looked at Kendall, who was staring at her parents with hatred, not for using her, but for calling her useless. The realization crashed into Damon like something physical. I watched his posture change in the shadows. His shoulders pulled back, his hands drew into fists. He had been a host to a parasite for so long, he had forgotten what it felt like to move, with his own blood running through him. No, Damon said. What did you just say? Gerald demanded, stepping forward. I said no, Damon repeated louder this time. I am not going to beg him. I am done begging. And I am done with you. He moved with a sudden violent energy that caught everyone off guard. He grabbed the nearest suitcase, Carolyn's Louis Vuitton bag, which I had unknowingly paid for. Damon hauled it to the back door. What do you think you're doing? Carolyn shrieked, scrambling to her feet. Taking out the trash, Damon roared. He kicked the door open. A blast of winter air tore into the kitchen, scattering snow across the floor. Damon heaved the suitcase out into the darkness. It landed in a snowbank with a heavy, muffled thud. He turned around and grabbed Gerald's duffel bag. Gerald lunged for his arm, but Damon shoved him back with the full force of 3 years of buried rage. Get out, Damon screamed. Get out of this house. Get out of my life. You can't do this, Gerald yelled, stumbling backward. It is freezing out there. We have rights. You have nothing, Damon bellowed, hurling the second bag out the door. You are leeches. You wrecked my marriage. You destroyed my relationship with my father. You turned me into a thief. Get out before I do something I can't take back. The raw violence in his voice frightened them. Gerald and Carolyn scrambled toward the door, snatching at their coats, terrified of the man they had spent years cutting down to size. They fled into the snow, cursing and slipping as they chased their luggage through the dark. Damon slammed the door and threw the lock. He pressed his forehead against the cold wood chest, heaving like he'd just sprinted a mile. The kitchen went silent, except for the wind screaming outside. Kendall stood alone by the island. She watched Damon's back. She did not look sorry. She looked like she was running calculations. She was tallying up the situation in her head, writing her parents off as a lost cause, and mapping her next move. Damon, she said softly, her voice falling to a whisper. Baby, hear me out. They are gone now. It is just the two of us. We can still pull this back together. Your dad is furious, but he is not going to let us starve. We can put all of it on them. We can say they drove us to it. Damon turned around slowly. He studied his wife, the woman he had worshipped, the woman he had become a criminal for. You forged his signature. Kendall, he said, his voice completely flat. You stole from his retirement account. I did it for us, she pleaded, reaching toward him. No, Damon said, stepping back. You did it for yourself. You did it because you needed to look wealthy. You did it because you are exactly the same as they are. Kendall's expression hardened. The victim's mask dropped away, and what was underneath it was cold and sharp. Fine, she spat. If that is how you want it, fine. I want a divorce, Good Damon said. So do I. I want half, Kendall said, planting her feet and folding her arms. Half of everything, Damon, the furniture, the electronics, whatever is left in those bank accounts. I want alimony. I want child support for a child. We don't even have yet, but I will sue you for emotional distress until I squeeze it out of you. This marriage was a contract, Damon, and you are in breach of it. I know your father has money. I know he set up trusts for you. I am not walking out of here empty-handed. I will burn your name into the ground. I will tell everyone you abused me. I will tell everyone you coerced me into signing that confession. I want a settlement, Damon. I want $1.2 million, or I go straight to the press. Damon laughed. It was the sound of pure, unhinged hysteria. You want half, Kendall. Look around you. Look at this house. Look at the orange eviction stickers on the walls. I don't care about stickers, Kendall screamed. I know what you are worth on paper. Your father is rich. That makes you rich. I want what I'm owed. That was my cue. I stepped out of the darkened hallway and into the pale glow of the kitchen lantern. The sound of my boots on the hardwood made Kendall spin around. She gasped, pressing her hand to her chest. You, I said, my voice filling the hollow room. You want half, Kendall? Let us talk about half. Everett, she stammered, backing away until the counter stopped her. I didn't know you were here. I am always here, Kendall, I said, moving toward her. I own the building. Now you mention dividing the marital assets. As the primary line holder on this estate, I believe I can help with the arithmetic. I drew a ledger from my coat pocket. Asset number 1, I said. The house market value, $1.2 million. Mortgage debt, $1.2 million, plus $50,000 in late fees and legal penalties. Equity 0. I turned the page. Asset number 2, the vehicles. Repossessed. Equity 0. Asset number 3, the bank accounts. Currently overdrawn by $4,000 in legal fees. I looked at her. Her eyes were wide and glassy with fear. "So, Kendall," I continued, "if you want half of the marital estate, you are entitled to exactly half of the debt. You owe me $600,000 for the house. You owe the bank $2,000 for the overdraft, and you owe the state a few years of your life for the forgery. Which portion of that would you like to take with you tonight?" Kendall looked at me, then she looked at Damon. Damon was not looking at her. He was staring at the floor, ashamed but set. "There is no trust fund," Kendall, I said, delivering the last blow. "There is no inheritance. Not for you. The trust was dissolved this morning on account of criminal misconduct by the beneficiary. Damon has nothing. You picked the carcass clean, and there is no meat left on the bone." Kendall stared at me. Her mouth opened and closed. The calculation behind her eyes went dark, replaced by the cold terror of absolute poverty. "You are lying," she whispered. "You are hiding money somewhere. I am protecting money," I said. "My money. Money you will never get your hands on again. Now get out." I pointed to the door. Kendall swept her eyes around the freezing kitchen one final time. She looked at the high-end refrigerator, humming uselessly. She looked at the granite island where she had staged every Instagram photo. She looked at the life she had spent years performing. Then she turned to Damon. "You are a loser," she hissed. "You were always a loser. I should have married the banker." Damon didn't flinch. "Go, Kendall," he said quietly. "Just go." Kendall grabbed her purse. No coat, no suitcase. Nothing but the clothes on her back and a phone with no service. She walked to the back door and pushed it open, and the wind slammed into her, nearly knocking her sideways. She looked back at us one last time, her face contorted with hatred. "I hope you both rot in hell," she screamed. Then she walked out into the snow, and the dark swallowed her whole. Damon crossed the kitchen and closed the door. He locked it. Then he turned, put his back against it, and slid down until he was sitting on the floor with his knees pulled up to his chest. He buried his face in his hands and began to weep. It was the sound of a man who had lost everything and found himself in the wreckage. I stood there and watched him for a moment. I did not go to him, not yet. He needed to sit with this. He needed to feel the full weight of his freedom. The house was silent. The rats were gone. The cold was still there, but for the first time in 3 years, the air in that room was clean. New Year's Eve morning came in under a sky the color of bruised iron. It was the last day of the year and the last day of Damon's life as a counterfeit aristocrat. I pulled up to the house at 10 o'clock in the morning. The streets were quiet, the holiday decorations looking sad and worn against the gray, dirty snow. The driveway at 317 Ridgecrest Way was empty. The Porsche was gone. The rental car was gone. The movers I had brought in 2 days earlier had worked with surgical precision. The 75-inch television was gone. The leather sectional sofas were sitting in a storage unit in Tennessee. The expensive art was swathed in bubble wrap and tagged as collateral. All that remained was the structure itself, the hollow shell of a life Damon had never actually paid for. I walked up the path. The front door was unlocked. I stepped inside. The house was freezing, the air thick and stale. I moved into the living room. It was bare except for a single figure seated in the middle of the hardwood floor. Damon was sitting cross-legged in his winter coat, a beanie pulled down low over his ears. He was shivering faintly, but he wasn't staring at his phone. He wasn't pacing. He was just sitting there, eyes fixed on the empty patch of wall where the abstract painting used to hang. He looked smaller than I remembered. He looked like 10 years had found him in the space of 7 days. He heard the heavy fall of my boots on the floor, but he didn't look up. He didn't startle. He just sat there waiting the way a man waits when he knows the end is already on its way. I stopped 10 feet from him, keeping the distance a judge keeps from a defendant. I said nothing. I let the silence stretch until it forced him to acknowledge me on his own terms. Damon drew a slow breath. It rattled coming out. "You're early," he said, his voice rough and dry. "The eviction notice said I had until noon. I haven't finished sweeping the kitchen yet." I glanced at my watch. "It is 10:15. I said, my voice carrying through the empty room. "I came to inspect the property before the final handover. I need to confirm there is no further damage to the asset." Damon nodded slowly. "It is clean," he said. I patched the holes in the garage wall where the gym mirrors were mounted. I found some spackle down in the basement. "It is not perfect, but I did what I could, Dad. I wanted to leave it in better shape than I found it." He finally raised his eyes to mine. They were red-rimmed and hollow, but they were clear. The arrogance had drained out of them. The entitlement was gone. What was left was a man who had been stripped all the way down to the frame. "I am sorry," he said barely above a whisper. "I know that doesn't repair anything. I know I can't give back the money I burned through. But I am sorry. Not about the house, not about the car. I am sorry for disrespecting you. I am sorry for standing by while they treated you like hired help in your own investment. I was weak, Dad. I wanted them to approve of me so badly that I forgot who actually loved me. I traded my father for a fan club that was laughing at me the whole time. I held my ground and stayed silent, letting him get it all out. He wiped his nose on his sleeve, a gesture worlds away from the polished executive he'd spent years pretending to be. I signed the divorce papers. He went on, his voice splintering. "Kendall is gone. She took the jewelry I hadn't tagged. She grabbed whatever cash was sitting in the jar. But she left Theo. She called him baggage. She said a crying child would wreck her odds of landing the next man." He paused, swallowing hard against a sob. He looked up at me with desperate, pleading eyes. "Dad, I have one favor to ask. The last one, I swear. Not for me. I am heading to a men's shelter tonight. I already have the address. I will work through it. But Theo, can you take him? Can you hold on to him while I get back on my feet? I can't have him sleeping on a cot in some gymnasium. He's frightened, Dad. He loves you. He needs his grandfather. Please, just take the boy. Punish me all you want. Let me go without. But save him." I looked at my son. He was handing me his child and asking for nothing in return for himself. He was willing to go homeless to shield his boy. He was finally behaving like a father. He was finally behaving like a man. The fury that had driven me all week began to cool, hardening into something else, a clear, steady resolve. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment the boy inside him died and a man took his place. I reached into the inside pocket of my wool coat. Damon flinched on instinct, bracing for a restraining order or an invoice for damages. Instead, I drew out a single sheet of heavy paper and extended it toward him. "Take it," I said. Damon looked at the paper, then up at me. He reached out with an unsteady hand and took it. He squinted at the print in the dim light. "Employment contract." He read aloud, his brow drawing together. "Employer Granger Logistics, formerly Apex Marketing." He looked up, thrown. "Apex," he said. "That is my company. That is where I work. We are going under, Dad. We missed payroll last week. The CEO has gone dark." "Not anymore," I said. "I purchased the debt this morning, Damon. I acquired the controlling interest at 9 a.m. I dismissed the board of directors an hour later. They were incompetent, just like their marketing director." Damon stared at me, his mouth working without sound. "You bought the company. You own Apex." "I own everything, Damon," I said. "The debt, the building, the payroll, all of it. You are terminated from the marketing department, effective now. You are not fit to lead a team. You couldn't even lead your own household, but you are rehired this moment as a level 1 inventory associate in the warehouse." Damon looked back down at the paper. "You start tomorrow at 6 a.m., I said. "You will answer to the foreman. You will load trucks. You will sweep floors. You will count inventory. The pay is $15 an hour. You clock in, you clock out. No bonuses, no commission." I reached into my pocket and produced a key, a plain brass key. "I have rented a 2-bedroom apartment on Arbor Lane," I said, dropping the key onto the floor in front of him. "It is clean, it is safe, but it is not free. You will pay me rent each month out of your paycheck market rate. One late payment and you are out. One complaint and you are out." I looked down at him. "Theo stays with me during your shifts. You pick him up every evening. You raise him. You feed him. You learn what it means to be a father on a real budget. And if you work hard, if you show up every single day for 5 years without asking me for a dime, then maybe I might let you get behind the wheel of the Porsche again. Do we have a deal?" Damon picked up the key. He closed his fist around it. He looked at the contract. Then he looked at me, and the tears came. "Yes, sir," he said. "We have a deal." "Get up," I said. "You have a shift in the morning? And Damon, tuck your shirt in. You represent me now." 3 months had passed since the purge of New Year's Eve, and the world had tilted toward spring. I stood on the catwalk above the main distribution floor of Granger Logistics, formerly Apex Marketing. Below me, the warehouse was alive, forklifts moving conveyor belts, humming, the whole floor in motion. Right in the middle of it all was employee number 442, Damon Granger. He was not in a suit. He had on a gray uniform shirt with his name stitched above the pocket and steel-toed boots worn dull from use. He was hoisting a crate that weighed 50 pounds, swinging it onto a pallet with a grunt. Sweat tracked down the sides of his face, and his hands were chalked with dust. He looked tired, exhausted honestly. But when he swiped his forearm across his forehead and exchanged a word with the foreman beside him, there was a light behind his eyes that had never once been there when he was parked in corner offices playing at being important. Every evening at 5, Damon punched out. He did not stop at a bar. He walked 3 blocks to the small 2-bedroom apartment I rented him. I stopped by once a week to check on things. It was no palace. The floors were linoleum and the furniture was secondhand, but it was kept clean. On one Tuesday night, I watched him make spaghetti for Theo. The sauce came from a jar, and the garlic bread was a shade too dark, but Theo was eating it like it had come out of a 5-star kitchen. Damon was laughing, chasing tomato sauce off my grandson's chin with a napkin. No nannies, no iPads propped up to buy his attention, just a father and his son working it out between them. Damon was learning what money was worth, because for the first time in his life, he was earning it with his own sweat. He paid me his rent on the first of the month in cash. He never once asked for a discount. He never complained about his back giving out. He was becoming the man I had always hoped he would be, and watching it happen was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. While Damon was clawing his way up from nothing, Kendall was sinking deeper into the pit she had dug for herself. My private investigator Desmond kept watch on her, not out of any concern for her welfare, but because I understood that a narcissist never goes down quietly. Kendall had landed work as a cashier at a discount grocery store 3 towns over. It was the only establishment willing to take her on, with a pending criminal charge for forgery. She was renting a basement apartment, paying under the table, most likely with money she had squeezed out of whatever friends she had left. Desmond sent me photographs. She looked haggard. Her roots were growing and her designer wardrobe had been sold off or destroyed, and the permanent scowl she wore was driving customers away. But she was not merely miserable. She was scheming. She had been leaving vague threats on anonymous message boards about collecting what she was owed. She had been tracking Damon's schedule. She knew he was at the warehouse all day. She knew Theo was with me, but she also knew that on Thursdays Theo had soccer practice at the elementary school. On the second Thursday of April, Desmond intercepted a text message Kendall had sent to her mother, who was at that moment fighting deportation proceedings from a holding facility. The message read, "I am going to get him today, Mom. Once I have Theo, they will have to listen. They will have to pay me to get him back. I want $500,000 or I vanish with the kid." It was a kidnapping scheme. It was amateurish and born of desperation, but that combination made it dangerous. She believed she could snatch Theo off that field, use him as leverage, and bleed a retirement fund out of me. She had forgotten that I do not leave my assets unguarded, especially the human ones. I did not call the police right away. I wanted her caught in the act. I wanted her intentions on record with no room for interpretation. I called my security team. I called the school, and then I drove to the soccer field. I pulled my truck beneath the shade of an oak tree and watched. Theo was out on the grass, running drills in his oversized jersey, laughing and chasing the ball, keeping up with his friends. He was safe. Stationed along the sidelines in plain clothes were 2 of my best security contractors. To anyone watching, they looked like parents, but their eyes were sweeping the perimeter with the focus of hawks. At 4:15, a rusted sedan rolled into the parking lot. Kendall climbed out. She had a hoodie pulled low over her face and a pair of sunglasses on. She was twitching, glancing over her shoulder with every step. She moved toward the field, not through the main gate, but edging along the fence line toward the spot where the kids came for water breaks. She was moving fast. The whistle sounded and the kids broke for water. Theo jogged over to grab his water bottle near the fence. Kendall lunged. She gripped the chain link with both hands, calling out to him. "Theo, baby, come here. It is Mommy. Come here, quick. I have a surprise for you." Theo stopped. He looked at her. His expression was confused. He took a step back. "Come on, Theo," she hissed, her voice fraying with desperation. "We have to leave right now." She reached over the top of the fence, fingers grasping for his jersey. That was enough. I signaled my men. They moved without hesitation. Before Kendall could lay a hand on the boy, one of the guards had her wrist locked and twisted behind her back, pinning her against the fence. She let out a high-pitched wail of shock and fury. "Get off me!" she screamed. "That is my son. I have rights." The second guard stepped in front of Theo, blocking her from his view, while the coach steered the boy away from the fence. The police cruiser I had waiting around the corner rolled onto the grass, siren chirping. I stepped out of my truck and crossed the field toward her. Kendall spotted me, her eyes filled with hatred. "You set me up!" she screamed, fighting against the handcuffs the officer was clicking into place. "You old devil, you set me up!" I stopped 5 feet away. I kept my voice level. "I did not set you up, Kendall," I said. "I simply gave you room to be yourself. You violated the restraining order. You attempted custodial interference, and we have the text messages establishing intent to ransom a minor. That is kidnapping, Kendall. That is a federal crime." The officer read her rights as he guided her into the back of the squad car. She kicked at the window, screaming curses at me, at Damon, at the world that had refused to hand her what she wanted. She was not a mother fighting for her child. She was a criminal fighting for a payday. And she had lost. I watched the cruiser pull away. I looked back at the soccer field where Theo was safe. I let out a long breath. The threat was neutralized. The cancer had been cut out. That evening, Damon sat across from me in my study. He was still in his work uniform, carrying the smell of cardboard and sweat. Between us on the desk sat a stack of documents, the divorce papers with full custody terms laid out. I told him the DA is charging her with attempted kidnapping and extortion. She will not be getting bail. Damon nodded slowly. He did not look grief-stricken. He looked like a man who had just set down a weight he'd been carrying for years. He picked up the pen. "I am sorry she did that, Dad," he said quietly. "I am sorry she put Theo through that." "It is done," I said. "Sign the papers, son. Put it behind you." Damon signed his name with a steady hand. He slid the papers back across to me. His eyes moved to the custody clause. Sole legal and physical custody awarded to the father. "She never loved him," Damon said, his voice catching slightly. "She only loved what he represented. A chain linking her to you. A meal ticket." I rose and poured 2 glasses of scotch. I handed one across to him. "You are the father now, Damon," I said, touching my glass to his. "You are the one who protects him. You are the one who raises him, and you are doing a damn good job." Damon took a sip. He smiled, a real one, the kind that reached all the way up to his eyes. "I have a shift in the morning," he said. "I need to get home." "Go home, son," I said. He stood, tucked his copy of the contract into his pocket, and walked out. He moved with his head up. He moved like a man who had earned the right to his own life. I watched him go. I turned off the light in the study. The house was quiet. The war was over, and for the first time in a long while, I was certain that the future of the Granger name was in capable hands. Not because of what was sitting in the bank, but because of the man making his way down the driveway. The snow was falling again, but this time it carried no grief. It felt like a clean white sheet drawn over a warm bed. It was Christmas Day, exactly 1 year after I had wheeled my truck around on the highway and declared war on my own flesh and blood. I stood in the kitchen of my brick house in the neighborhood Kendall had once turned her nose up at. The air was dense and rich, but it was a good richness. It smelled of hickory smoke, brown sugar mustard, and the sharp bite of my pulled pork sauce bubbling low on the stove. I had been up since 4 in the morning, same as every year, tending to the smoker out back. 3 pans of my slow-smoked pulled pork were resting on the counter, wrapped in foil and steaming gently. The slow-cooked black-eyed peas were simmering with smoked ham hocks. The peach cobbler was cooling on the rack. I looked around the room. It was not a mansion. No marble countertops, no sub-zero refrigerators. The cabinets were oak and the floor was linoleum that I kept spotless. But the house was alive. The radiator hissed and clanked in the corner, pushing heat through the room. The Christmas tree in the living room was real, a 6-foot Fraser fir that filled the air with the smell of pine needles and sap. It was hung with ornaments that didn't match one another. There were glass balls from the 70s, hand-painted wooden stars, and a few construction paper snowflakes Theo had made in kindergarten. It was not an Instagram aesthetic, it was a home. Parked out in the driveway was my 2008 Chevy Silverado. Beside it sat a modest sedan, a used Honda Accord that Damon had bought with his own money 3 months ago. He had saved the down payment straight from his warehouse wages. He paid the insurance himself. He washed it himself every Sunday morning. It was not a Porsche. It did not turn a single head, but it started every morning and it got him to work, and it belonged to him in a way the luxury SUV never had. I stirred the sauce and tasted it. It was perfect. I wiped my hands on my apron and listened to the sounds drifting in from the living room. It was the sound of a remote control race car set zipping around the track and the high-pitched laughter of a 6-year-old boy. It was the best sound I had heard in decades. Dinner was finished, and the table was a satisfying wreckage of empty plates and picked clean bones. We had eaten like kings, no ascots in sight. No conversation about vintage wines or keto diets. We ate with our hands, wiped our mouths on paper napkins, and talked about football and the weather and the inventory numbers down at the warehouse. Damon sat at the head of the table where he belonged. He looked like a different man from the one I had known a year ago. The softness had left his face. His jaw was sharper now, framed by a neatly trimmed beard that carried a few flecks of gray. His hands were rougher. There were calluses across his palms and a small scar on his thumb from a box cutter. He had the tired look of a man who had put in an honest week's work, but his eyes were clear. The shadows of anxiety and that desperate hunger for other people's approval gone. He had on a flannel shirt tucked into jeans, and the way he sat told you he was at ease inside his own skin. I started clearing the table, reaching for the platter. "Sit down, Dad," Damon said. His tone was firm, but there was warmth underneath it. "I can handle it," I said. "I am already up." "Sit down," Damon said again. "You cooked, I clean. That is the rule." He pushed back his chair, came around, and lifted the platter right out of my hands. He stacked the plates with quiet efficiency, scraping the scraps into the bin. He carried them to the sink, ran the water-squeezed soap onto the sponge, and went to work. No complaints, no glancing around for a dishwasher to take over. He simply washed the dishes. It was a small thing, an ordinary chore, but to me, it landed like a symphony. It was the act of a man who understood what it meant to serve. It was the act of a son who had learned to respect his father. In the living room, Theo was deep into the new Lego set I had picked up for him. He was building a castle, humming softly to himself, safe and warm and loved. He did not ask about his mother. He hadn't asked about her in months. Kendall was a ghost now, haunting the edges of our lives, but unable to reach us here. She was serving 3 years in a minimum security facility for attempted kidnapping and fraud. She sent letters occasionally, but the prison psychologist reported she was still laying the blame everywhere, except at her own feet. We did not read them. We kept our attention on the castle. Theo was raising brick by brick. Damon dried a plate and set it back in the cupboard. He leaned against the counter and looked over at me. "Those ribs were something else, Dad," he said. "Best batch yet." I nodded, taking a slow sip of my iced tea. Wood was dry this year, burned real hot. Damon smiled small and private. He let his eyes move around the kitchen. "I got a promotion," he said, keeping his voice casual. I lifted an eyebrow. I was already aware, of course I had signed the paperwork, but I wanted to hear him say it. "Is that right?" I asked. "Yeah." The foreman offered me a shift lead position, $2 raise, more responsibility. I will be running a crew of 5 men on the loading dock. "Congratulations, son," I said. "You earned it." "I did," Damon said. He looked down at his hands. "I truly did. I didn't ask for it. I didn't pull any strings. I just showed up and worked." He raised his eyes to mine, and for a moment they glistened with something he wasn't trying to hide. "Thank you, Dad," he said softly. "For the ribs?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "No," Damon said. "For saving me. For burning it all down. I hated you for it. You know that, right? Last year I genuinely wanted to be done with you. I thought you were the villain, but you were right. I was going under and I couldn't even see it. I was a slave to things I couldn't afford and people who felt nothing for me. You set me free." He stepped over and put his hand on my shoulder. He squeezed a strong, sure grip. "Merry Christmas, Dad. Merry Christmas, son," I said. He headed into the living room to help Theo with the castle gate. I stayed at the table a moment longer, just listening. I watched my son lower himself to the floor and play alongside his boy. I saw the way Theo looked up at his father, pure hero, worship in those eyes. Damon was his anchor now. Damon was the man who kept the roof over their heads, put food on the table, and made the world feel safe. And he was doing it on his own terms. I rose and walked to the window that faced the front yard. The snow was falling harder, pressing a white silence down over everything. My reflection stared back at me from the glass. An old man with gray hair and a face full of years. Everett Granger. People talk about love like it is something soft. They describe it as a warm blanket or a gentle word whispered in the dark. They say a parent's job is to give their children the world, to shield them from pain, to hand over everything you never had yourself. But standing there, looking at my own reflection, I knew the truth of it. That kind of love is easy. That kind of love is lazy. It produces weak men and entitled women. It produces monsters like Kendall and victims like the Damon of a year ago. Real love is hard. Real love is watching your child walk through fire and keeping your hands at your sides because you know the fire is what refines the gold. Real love means risking the relationship itself in order to rescue the soul inside it. I had put everything on the line. I had risked losing my son for good. I had risked finishing out my years completely alone. I had made myself the villain in his story so that he could become the hero in his own. I looked out at the street. Somewhere beyond that glass and the cold and the dark people, like the Duttons and Kendall, were out there people who had always believed the world owed them something. They were cold tonight. They were hungry. They were bitter. But inside this house, we were warm. I was no longer just the father who wrote the checks. I was the father who had taught the lesson. I had taken back my money, my house, and my dignity. But in exchange, I had handed my son something worth far more than any of that. I had given him his manhood. I stepped away from the window and walked into the living room. Theo looked up and broke into a grin, stretching a red Lego brick toward me. "Help me pop," he said. "I need a tower." I settled down onto the floor beside my son and my grandson. My knees protested, but I paid them no mind. I took the brick. "Let us build it together," I said. "I am Everett Granger. I am 71 years old. I have millions in the bank and properties across the state. If you made it to the end of this one, I want to say thank you. Truly. This story stayed with me long after I finished telling it, and I hope it stays with you too. Looking back at everything Everett walked through, the betrayal, the legal battles, the moment he had to become the hard man his son needed him to be, none of it came without a cost. There were nights, I imagine, when the loneliness of that fight felt heavier than the money ever could. But I believe God does not put the fire in a man without also putting the gold somewhere inside him. The Lord's timing on Damon's reckoning was not a punishment. It was a rescue, and Everett was the instrument of it. Here is what this story taught me, and what I want to leave with you. First, love your children enough to let them feel the weight of their own choices. Protecting them from consequences is not kindness, it is slow damage. Second, never mistake access for ownership. Being welcomed into someone's life, their home, their resources, that is a privilege, not a right. Third, document everything. Everett's patience and his paper trail were his most powerful weapons. Anger without evidence is just noise. Fourth, the people who call you foolish for holding your boundaries are usually the ones who have been profiting from your lack of them. This is the kind of family revenge story that hits differently when you have lived long enough to understand what real sacrifice looks like. For those of us in the adults 50-plus chapter of life, we know the hardest love is the kind that looks cold from the outside, but is burning with purpose underneath. If this story moved, you share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read them, and they matter to me. And if you have not already, subscribe to Honor Revenge Stories so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for being here. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one.